Hello all, and welcome to the September Patch Tuesday webcast. We're going to begin in just a few short moments, but before we do, I'd like to remind all attendees they are currently in listen-only mode. But please feel free to ask the panelists questions at any time, and we will answer them during the live Q&A sessions at the end. With that, I'd like to hand it over to Rob Brown.
Thank you, Heidi. A warm welcome to everybody today on our latest Patch Tuesday webinar series for September. We really appreciate you taking the time today to join us to learn about what's new in Patch Tuesday and some news in the industry. And as usual, I've invited two experts from my team to help us today. John, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Rob. Hey everyone, my name is John Cassell, Senior Solutions Architect at Syxsense, based in smoky Southern California at the moment. I've been working in IT for many years, specializing in desktop and server operations, and at Syxsense, I dabble in pre-sales, customer onboarding, and training.
Thank you, John. And Peter, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Rob. Hi, everybody. My name's Pete. I've worked for Syxsense as a pre-sales consultant for about 5 years. Prior to my current role, I worked for an oil company where I managed a tool called, well, at the time was called Landesk. The tool was used to manage around 4,500 devices for general asset management, software deployment, and of course, patch management.
Cheers, Pete. And hello again. My name is Rob Brown. I'm the Director of Services from our UK head office. One of my teams are responsible for the security solutions, being patch management one of them, and we've deployed over 100 million patches over the last 15 or so years. So welcome to everyone for joining. We want to provide some feedback. We actually really encourage good and bad feedback on our webcasts, and I'm really happy that some of the feedback we've had is to improve what we're actually presenting on this to bring a value, as we understand the next 60 minutes are very precious. Some of the feedback we had was actually when we added the macOS and the Linux content, we added too many slides, and we wanted to, a lot of feedback was that we should try to present it faster in not so many slides, and actually to bring the highest critical vulnerabilities to you in a slide. So that is exactly what we have done. And we have had quite a bit of other feedback which actually needed a more of a direct response to them. So if you do have questions, please feel free to add them to the chat. You can also email us. You can also put questions on Facebook. But if you do have questions that you want a personal response, you can contact us through the website. So one of the other requests we had was to add some news. That actually came from a question where we showed you our Syxsense website, and we have a specific holding page for Patch Tuesday, but actually there's quite a lot of other content there. So one of the requests we had was, could we just talk about some of the things that have recently happened in the month of August and into September. So we've got a couple of news bulletins for everyone, specifically around the content that we're presenting today. The first one, if you are a macOS user, you may be surprised to see that the first time in 20 years, Mac is actually no longer going to be called Mac OS X, X meaning 10, because they're bringing out a new release of the Mac OS operating system. John has actually done a lot of homework on that, so I won't say too much, except to say that the beta has been out since the 6th of August, and potentially that could be coming very soon. Also, Microsoft announced that feature update 1803 for the Windows 10 Enterprise has been extended to May 2021. Feature updates is actually something we're covering today, so that's going to be really exciting. But the extension of that is obviously for the COVID-19 industry. Businesses aren't able to roll out feature updates as fast as they would like. Maybe they don't have the technology or the strategy. Either way, Microsoft actually made the decision to extend it, and that's a really good really good of Microsoft to do that. Microsoft have actually re-released 6 patches for the Intel Microcode. Now, if you remember back to 2018, there was actually a global vulnerability known as Spectre and Meltdown that specifically made the Intel CPU vulnerable to a particular data theft. They could actually expose a vulnerability and they could collect data from memory inside the CPU. Microsoft has actually reissued 6 patches. So even though you have deployed those 6 patches, you need to, as per recommendations from Microsoft, redeploy those updates. So there have been changes made to them. So those 6 microcodes were actually released last week. And also Microsoft have announced that they're going to end support for Adobe Flash in January of next year. So January 2021, along with Apple, Adobe and Facebook. So that's the news we've had so far. Really exciting to bring this new section to the webinar. We think it'd be very useful, especially because we do have a very good marketing department who do research a lot of security related content for our clients. John, you are going to give us a small update on the third-party updates that have been released recently. Let us know what you've been working on.
Yeah, appreciate it, Rob. Not too high severity updates for the past month, but I will go through ones that I would like to still highlight. And before I even start, I always want to mention that, of course, third-party patches are just as important as operating system updates to remedy potential vulnerabilities. Since last month, additional updates have been released, but normally I would say major vulnerabilities. There are only a couple this time. First, Adobe has patched 18 total flaws within multiple products. Adobe Experience Manager, a popular content management solution, has received fixes for 5 critical vulnerabilities related to cross-site scripting, which in turn could allow attackers to execute JavaScript in victims' browsers. Experience Manager has also included another 6 important severity fixes. Adobe stated that based on previous experience, we do not anticipate exploits are imminent, but as best practice, Adobe does recommend administrators install the updates soon. They've also released additional updates for FrameMaker and InDesign. FrameMaker included 2 additional critical flaw fixes for Windows installations only, related to out-of-bounds read glitch and stack-based buffer overflow errors. InDesign included fixes for 5 additional critical flaws in Windows as well as Mac OS. Per the normal statement from Adobe, successful exploitation of the flaws could lead to arbitrary code execution in the context of the current user. It's a common statement I hear from them. It should also be noted that Adobe also stated they're unaware of any exploits in the wild for any of the issues addressed in these updates. Another particular update, Wireshark, version 3.2.6 was released mid-August to resolve a high severity flaw, as well as a number of other lower to non-severity flaws. So there's only the high severity that I really wanted to highlight. This flaw does resolve situations in which the Kafka protocol dissector could crash. And again, there were no new features, no new protocols released in this particular version. Since last Patch Tuesday, Firefox version 80 was released near the end of August, and it's already since been updated with another version, 80.0.1. This is a big change in version 80 that Firefox can now be set to the default system PDF viewer. Major change, something that I'll actually use, happy since Chrome has actually been supporting that for some time, as well as some other browsers, but now Firefox does. Firefox 80 also resolved a few higher severity flaws in the Mozilla maintenance service and related to attacker-induced prompts for extension installation. A number of other lower severity flaws were also remediated, but also in the latest version, in the beginning of the month, version 80.0.1, these fixes all seem to be related to stability and performance with no particular security concerns. However, anyone running Firefox on anything earlier than version 80 should update as soon as possible due to the high severity flaws. FileZilla released version 3.5 with new support for tardigrade, a popular decentralized cloud storage service. To quote, because of FileZilla's broad adoption, this integration means that every FileZilla user can easily tap into the tardigrade world without the need to be a developer or a software engineer. This version of FileZilla also fixed some layout and sorting issues. Zoom, which we know has been used quite frequently in the past, well, this year especially, has also released multiple versions since last month. Seem to do it about once a week for a new client on average, of course. And this newest versions include new bridge host options. Administrators will be happy about this one, an MSI installation route to deploy on a large scale, chat and voice enhancements, as well as a number of other bug fixes. The latest version, 5.2.451, has disabled telephone options for webinar attendees on Windows, Mac, Linux, iOS, and Android. So not necessarily a security concern, but something I did want to highlight since there is going to be a feature disabled, but temporarily. They stated that these options have been temporarily disabled, and they will re-enable them in the next few weeks. So in the meantime, attendees can connect to webinar audio through the Zoom desktop client, web client, or mobile app, and webinar hosts and panelists can still join by telephone as well as through computer audio. Additional products to highlight that have also seen updates since last patch Tuesday: Adobe Flash Player, Cisco WebEx, Microsoft Edge, Dropbox, Opera, Skype, and VirtualBox. And typically I don't cover extensions, plugins, optional updates, or add-ons, but I do want to highlight a zero-day vulnerability within the WordPress plugin File Manager. This particular vulnerability exists between version 6 and 6.8, and a fix is available in the latest version 6.9, released about a week ago. I just really wanted to highlight this particular vulnerability as it may affect hundreds of thousands of websites to a malicious exploit. If this plugin applies to you, be sure to update as soon as possible. Lastly, my monthly reminder to all administrators: always include third-party updates in the patch management process. It's not just about the operating system updates. Any application, any third-party product can be considered a major vulnerability if not updated regularly.
Thank you, John. That's absolutely brilliant, and we do see a lot of focus around Patch Tuesday on Microsoft patches, and not enough, in our opinion, on third-party. Yeah, that's brilliant. Thank you, John. You should be able to find all of these updates in the Syxsense patch manager. Okay. Secondly, Pete, Windows servicing. I'm very keen on the Windows 10 approach to feature updates. I know you've done a lot of work on Windows servicing so far, and you're going to give us a 101. It would just be a basic, but what I would like to ask is if Windows feature updates are something that you understand, that's brilliant. If you still have questions and you'd like us to go more in depth in a future webinar on Windows servicing, maybe some strategy assistance, how you can go from one to the next, sort of things that we've learned in dealing with hundreds and hundreds of customers that have had challenges around feature updates, specifically in a multi-diverse distributed environment. Please let us know, and we'll add something into a future webinar, or potentially a strategy for feature updates going forward. So I'm really excited to see what you've done, Pete. Over to you.
Thanks, Rob. Yeah, great. So hi, everyone. So this month I want to give a short high-level talk on Windows 10 feature updates with a view to expanding the points that I raise in a future webinar, obviously depending on feedback, whether people want to actually go into great depth or not. Next slide, please, Rob. Okay, so what is a Windows 10 feature update? It is basically an upgrade to the operating system, which is deployable to devices that are running an earlier version of the feature update itself. They generally include new OS features, visual improvements, and enhancements to the actual OS. Next slide, please, Rob. Okay, so here you can see a chart that shows the life cycle of the Windows 10 feature updates. Generally, once a new version has been released, it will remain in support for 18 months. This means that Microsoft will release patches for that period of time. Note that there are exceptions, and obviously Rob mentioned an exception earlier on. This is where Microsoft basically extend the support time. You can also see in the chart that the end-of-life feature update can differ depending on the exact version of Windows 10. For example, Home Edition, Pro, Pro for Education, that sort of thing. Next slide, please, Rob. Okay, so what they are not. They are not cumulative updates or even security updates, although having said that, a feature update may possibly make changes to the operating system that improves the security of that OS. Next slide, please, Rob. Okay, so why is it important to know about feature updates? Basically, Microsoft are somewhat forcing your hand with feature updates by creating patches in such a way that they will either not install on devices that are running an out-of-date feature update, or the patch will roll back, which is basically an uninstall once the device has been rebooted. Now, this, of course, means that that device is effectively not patched and therefore represents a security risk or weak point in your environment. Next slide, please, Rob. Okay, so things to consider when and to take into account when deploying feature updates. The first thing I would be doing is creating a test lab with a reasonable quantity of test devices that represent your estate in terms of both manufacturer and model number of the devices that your end users are using. The test devices need to have the same software installed as the end user devices, and obviously, most importantly, if there's any software that is deemed critical in your organization, then that should certainly be included as part of the test program. Once the test devices have had the new feature update deployed to them, then obviously analyze the test results to determine if any device types need to be excluded from the rollout, or if indeed there are any alternative actions that could be taken, such as updating the software that now fails to function. Obviously, if possible, talk to the vendor of that software to seek advice on this sort of thing. In addition to that, you may find that you need to, if you're using ISOs to deploy images or deploy the actual update, you might find that you need to actually have different ISOs for different actual hardware, basically for the different device types. One thing that's very good with the feature updates is the extensive error logging that's been built into that. So make use of the error logging in order to help resolve issues and errors that occur. When I say extensive error logging, there certainly is, but the logs are somewhat buried within the folder structure, and maybe in a future webinar we'll give you some more details as to where to find those logs. And I believe our Syxsense product, actually, we're working on ways to pull back some of that data and bring that back into the console to make it a lot easier than trolling through folders and things like that. Anyway, other things to take into consideration would be the actual file size. It can easily be 4 GB in size, so it may not be practical to deploy such a large file across a VPN, and I guess that's potentially one of the reasons why Microsoft have extended the feature update for the version that Rob mentioned, and it'll be because there's a lot of people working at home and it's just not possible to push that sort of file across a VPN, or certainly not easily anyway. Other things that you might want to do is consider the deployment tool that you're using in order to give you control and flexibility when deploying the feature update. If the tool can organize devices based on inventory data, then this can help you when including or excluding devices from the deployment. In other words, targeting the right devices with the right ISO, or even excluding those devices entirely for the short term until a solution is found. I would personally stagger the rollout of a feature update and build delays into that rollout plan in order to allow time for feedback from the users that have received the new version. Microsoft have actually termed this as ring deployment, and it could basically prevent a major issue where the IT department are deemed to have taken down all of the end user devices. You know, that's certainly something that you don't want to be accused of. So basically learn from each stage of the rollout, make adjustments where required to increase the success rate as you go down the actual rollout plan. And finally, I guess, remember that the more extensive the initial testing is, then the less chance there is of IT causing a major outage of devices. And I think that holds true with anything that you're doing towards these devices, patch deployment, software deployment, that type of thing. I think extensive testing is something that I've learned the hard way in the past. It could come back to bite you if you roll something out and you think, oh, I wish I'd tested it on that particular piece of hardware, and I didn't, and now I've got a problem. But yeah, that's all I've got for the time being. But as I said, we may well be returning to feature deployments in a bit more depth.
That's brilliant, Pete. Thank you. John.
Thanks, Rob. I just want to also point out, Pete hit the nail on the head with all those particular options, and especially going in that certain order. When it comes to the software that is on the machines, I also always want to place this extra priority on AV software or any background monitoring solution, because those do have a tendency to fail the feature upgrade instantaneously. But also, I'm not going to name any particular products. There have actually been certain products in the past on the day of the release that have come out and told their customers, don't upgrade yet, we don't even support it. So do always make sure to check with the vendor, especially with AV software. Sometimes you have to disable, sometimes you have to uninstall it entirely. It's more important than the other applications, but of course, testing as a whole will tell you if there's going to be a conflict.
Yeah.
Thanks, John. I agree.
You actually just said what I was going to say, exactly like that. No, I've seen a lot of distress in some of the forums we go into where, feature updates are now out of date because you don't have the capability of deploying it, and suddenly your antivirus actually stops downloading signatures or definition files because your feature update is no longer supported by Microsoft. So you're sort of caught. You don't have a working antivirus, but you can't go to the next feature update because of a distributed environment. And the second thing I was going to say is in the lab, please make sure that you have your corporate antivirus running on those devices, because when you deploy the feature update, you also want to time how long it takes. This is something that isn't going to take 5 minutes. It potentially could take an hour and a half to fully finish. And if you have an antivirus that is not configured with the exclusions required to enable the install to be as effective and as efficient as it could be, your users could be waiting 2 hours before their device says you are ready to go again.
Yeah, it's certainly not a background task, is it, Rob? Yeah, end users are twiddling their thumbs while that feature update installs, and they've got no choice about it.
That's right. That's brilliant. That's excellent. I'd just like to repeat, if you'd like us to go into more details with feature updates, they are so important moving into Windows 10, and actually going forward, there could even be server feature updates as well, potentially. If you'd like us to cover it in more detail, we'd love to, especially some of the research that we built around reasons why devices are not successful and what you do about it when you have a failure. So thank you, guys. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the Patch Tuesday release cadence for this month. It's September. You know what? When I was writing this down, it's September already. I can't believe it. A couple of months and then we'll be into Halloween. But it is only the 9th and we have had 2 Patch Tuesdays already. September is a very early month for us. So last Tuesday was actually the 1st, and it's when we had the first 6 non-security Office updates released. Now these are enhancements to the product, so we do recommend that you do prioritize these. They're very, very important, especially sometimes that they are the foundation for security fixes that come actually in the real Patch Tuesday. The updates include Office and Outlook 2016, Skype for Business 2016, and Visio 2013. So those non-security updates do need to be deployed, because they do offer a better stability for the product, even though they're not security related. Yesterday we had another bumper crop. We had 129 security fixes fixed yesterday. Obviously, we covered the difference between patches and vulnerabilities. So we had 129 security fixes. And just to put that into perspective, Microsoft released 61 patches to resolve those 129 security vulnerabilities. So 61 patches of some operating systems will only need one, some will need two, some will need an awful lot. Specifically, Windows 7 has an individual patch per fix. Sorry, John? No? Okay. End of last month, we had one .NET Framework update. So there's actually a few, there's actually 3 Patch Tuesdays in a month. The first Tuesday is non-security Office. The second Tuesday is Microsoft security updates. The third Patch Tuesday is .NET Framework. And last month, we actually only had one .NET Framework update, but it was a preview. So unless you have actually subscribed to the preview, I think it's a slightly earlier version of .NET Framework, there were no .NET Framework updates to worry about. That is also non-security updates. But we did have an out of band and an advisory. Very important we cover those off first. So we had one out of band and one advisory. Now the out of band, this is interesting because we do go to the community to ask if users are interested in this particular vulnerability, and for some reason we heard that businesses weren't taking this vulnerability seriously. So CVE 1530 and 1537 was actually only rated important by Microsoft, and we suspect that might be why, because normally out of bands typically carry a higher severity. But the CVSS score is still 7.8, so it's very, very high on the list. Added to that it is a Windows remote access vulnerability. So it's a memory handle error, and that means that if you are able to cause a memory leak or something like that, you can crash the operating system or the application, and that is where you can get injection of code that could cause, like this one, an elevation of privilege. So, and also it's vulnerable for every operating system, all the way back to Windows 7, all the way through the whole roadmap. So, from our perspective, I don't believe it was taken seriously enough. And if you haven't deployed this already, you should definitely be deploying it with the rest of our recommendation today. But hopefully you've had 7 days or so, you will have deployed this already. And secondly, a very, very important advisory, very, very important. Servicing stack updates are sometimes not well known as much as they should be. So servicing stack updates are actually classified by Microsoft as critical updates, but it doesn't mean that they are actually resolving a vulnerability. These are prerequisites for any patch, and actually a lot of people don't realize that servicing stack updates are for Windows 7 as well as Windows 10. So it's not just a Windows 10 servicing stack. Servicing stack are also very important for hardware. So when you have a new Dell or a HP laptop, the success of any future deployment of patch rests on the servicing stack being applied first. So it improves the reliability of the update process to mitigate potential issues while installing the latest quality updates and feature updates. So if you don't have the latest servicing stack installed, maybe that new Dell laptop that you have won't work. The servicing stack is needed. Sometimes they're very small, so sometimes they're just a few megabytes in size, but sometimes they contain the critical DLLs that are needed to interact with the hardware. And if you don't have it, the patches roll back, and that can cause a lot of issues for end user disruption. So this is an advisory. It's quite an old one, but they just keep updating it. So you must make sure the latest servicing stack is installed before any patches are installed, and hopefully if you have a sophisticated tool set, servicing stack updates come as a prerequisite automatically with the patch deployment. So if you're trying to push a patch, it will install this as well. But if you are installing these manually, some clients are in a network, in a DMZ for example, or a dark network, in that case you do need to make sure you install these. And also lastly, be aware of the reboot requirement. Some servicing stack updates require a reboot prior to patches being installed, because that reboot finishes things off. So that advisory is very, very, very important to install. Now, to prioritize Patch Tuesday, we use 6 factors that help us determine how we set the priority for it. The first one we use is the vendor severity, and that runs from critical all the way to NA, obviously critical being the most important, NA being the least. CVSS score is the independent score for the vulnerability, and that also ranges from critical to NA, but it also has a scoring system of 0 to 10, 10 being the most critical, 0 being not so critical. Weaponized vulnerabilities, when they are announced, means that the bug or the issue with the operating system or third-party update is exposed, which means that someone is able to get into the operating system to deploy ransomware or a virus or data theft. Weaponized means that that has already happened. So somebody is actively exploiting the environment. It could just be a few businesses. It could be an awful lot of businesses. But weaponized vulnerabilities means that your priority needs to increase for those specifically if you're going to choose a specific list of patches to deploy. Weaponized should be one of your top picks. And public aware. Public aware is in 2 parts. So you've got public aware vulnerability where a patch does exist. Now, public aware means that the code to exploit that vulnerability exists on the internet somewhere. Maybe it was found through a bug bounty program. Nonetheless, the time between it being public aware and it being exploited can sometimes be very short. So if you do see a public aware vulnerability, it gives you an idea of a timeline of how important you have, how much time you have to install it. Now, the other side of public aware vulnerabilities is where a patch does not exist. And that is where we encourage our clients to look at vulnerability scanning solutions, because vulnerability scanning solutions typically look for the areas of the operating system that could be exploited should an exploit occur. And it could be things like user accounts or services that are running or ports that are still left open that could be used to exploit. And so that's where we encourage clients to go to a security scanning solution. If you have one, that's brilliant. Now, to help us out, we have countermeasures. And again, countermeasures exist in 2 parts as well. So you have a countermeasure called a mitigation. A mitigation means that you may have something that means you don't need the patch. Could be a sophisticated antivirus. A lot of these sophisticated antiviruses do mitigate the need for a lot of vulnerabilities, specifically around denial of service and things like that. And then you have a workaround. So a workaround is that maybe you don't need a patch if you can set a group policy, or you can set a registry key, or you could stop a service. So those actually help us. So we offset the risk of the vendor, CVSS, weaponized and public aware against countermeasures, and if they are available, we come with a score. The final thing is your exposure. It's the only thing we can't help you today with your environment in this webinar is your exposure. But if you take the first 5 and work out how much of the vulnerabilities we are going to show you have in your environment, that should give you an idea of what you should be focusing on first. In Syxsense, you have the ability to combine all of these together to give you a percentage, an automatic ranking of the vulnerability for you. So let's look at what was released Patch Tuesday and the priorities we've set for those patches and vulnerabilities. Now, we don't put them in the slide as usual. We have them on our website. The reason is because it's live on the website, and actually any changes that are made to the list post the publish date, actually you get the nearest, the latest data. So if you go to syxsense.com, we have over here our news page. So our news page has a Patch Tuesday holding area. We're just going to go to the news for now, and it takes a second. And here we have all of the other articles that we have published so far. If you have questions, this is actually where you can start one of the chats to any of our techies that are there listening. And if you'd like to, there's the free trial button at the top. We're going to take a look at the latest Patch Tuesday, and this is actually where you'll come each and every month, unless you'd like to subscribe. So if you'd like to subscribe to get an email with this Patch Tuesday directly into your mailbox, here you'll find the area to add your email address, and we can send that to you each and every month. So I may not have said right at the start, but we actually had a very, very large Patch Tuesday again. I think we've seen several months now of over 100 updates. I think there's maybe just been 1 or 2 months where we haven't had over 100 to deal with. And I suspect that is directly correlated to the number of feature updates that are still currently supported, because Microsoft keep moving it. John's actually going to give you the roadmap of what it currently looks like in just a second. But to put that into perspective, there's now been over 1,000 vulnerabilities fixed in 2018. Now, in this Patch Tuesday, we had 9 updates more than we did last month. So we were hoping to have a slightly easier end of the year, but it looks like that isn't going to be the case. If you're still using Windows 7, and a lot of our clients are still using Windows 7, if you have the ESU extension, then there are 33 vulnerabilities out of this list for you for Windows 7, and there are 39 vulnerabilities for you on 2008. Some of these are very critical. We're going to talk about some of them actually in just a second, but some of these are very critical to deploy. So if you still have that extension, if you have the ESU extension, you please prioritize some of these recommendations. Now, I just want to highlight that we obviously talk internally about strategies and how to best help our clients. And there's something I'd like to talk about, and that is the amount of file size that is needed, ever increasing actually, to deploy to your environment in order to keep it safe. Now, we've been thinking about how we could change our strategy, and I think that potentially we need to start pre-staging. So if you are pre-staging the binaries to your devices ahead of deployment, that's brilliant. If you're not aware of how to do that, maybe your tool set, maybe the vendor of your tool set can help you. But by delivering very slowly the pre-stage of a binary to a device actually helps in 2 ways. One, it means you have the files on the devices without disrupting the end user too much. Secondly, it actually increases the speed of the install. So if you're deploying and then installing, that whole time period could take several hours. But if you pre-stage today and install tomorrow, end user disruption is minimized just to the point of installing and rebooting. And obviously a lot of patches do need to reboot. So from a strategy perspective, we think that pre-staging is going to be something very, very important going forward, especially as Pete suggested, VPN traffic is going to be under a lot of stress over the coming months, as it has been all year. So we're going to look at my top picks. I'm doing this in ascending order, so least to most important first. So 0922 is a Microsoft COM vulnerability. It has no countermeasures. So you have to deploy this vulnerability you have to deploy this patch to all operating systems from 7 all the way to Windows Server 2019 and Server 2019 Plus. This is actually very important because all it takes is for you to be lured to a website that hosts this JavaScript. So if you go to that website, it runs on your machine automatically, and suddenly you've got the vulnerability, and access into your device will be compromised. 16875 is actually a Exchange server vulnerability. It was almost my top pick. Now, it's not currently weaponized, but it is a CVSS of 9.1. This has been weaponized already this year. So again, I talk a lot about the history and our experience in choosing these vulnerabilities. The 6 factors that we use to rank is very, very important. But actually, we have a lot of experience as well, especially if you can go back in time to a vulnerability type and see what was it 6 months ago, what was this vulnerability type 3 months ago. From that history, you can learn ahead of how somebody would be thinking if they were going to try to expose your environment in a hacking scenario. So because this has been weaponized and this does have such a high CVSS score, this should be the second most important patch to deploy to your environment, especially if you're using Microsoft Exchange Server. And my top pick for today is 1210 and 1595. These are both SharePoint. Now, I think SharePoint is probably less used than Exchange. So it's not going to, it's not a principal solution for every client or customer, but it does have a CVSS score of 9.9. Now, what that means is that this is almost considered 0-day. So there is something to be scored so highly means that either it is almost 0-day or something very slightly needs to be in the way in order for this to be easily exploited. But nonetheless, in this order, in ascending order, that is my top pick for today. Now, I did ask John and Pete to see which of these they would like to choose, and I think the guys have got some that they'd like to highlight as well. John, would you like to let us know what your pick is?
Yeah, sure. I chose an update for CVE 2020-1285. This is for a graphics device interface remote code execution vulnerability and the way it handles objects in the memory. There are, in fact, multiple ways an attacker could exploit the vulnerability too. First, being in a web-based attack scenario, an attacker could host a specially crafted website that is designed to exploit the vulnerability and then convince users to view the website. An attacker would have no way to force users to view the attack-controlled content. Instead, would have to convince users to take action, typically by getting them to open an email attachment or click a link in an email or instant message. In a file sharing attack scenario, though, an attacker could provide a specially crafted document instead, so offline content that is designed to exploit the vulnerability, and then convince users to open that document file.
Yeah, that's brilliant, John. That's actually, I don't think it will be too long before something like that could become weaponized. If everyone is working from home, I suppose the discipline, the office discipline, you could say, is slightly reduced. So getting an attachment probably isn't, it may not be the first thing to do is to delete it, especially if it's from somebody that you know. Yeah, thank you, John. Mm-hmm. And Pete, you've got one for us as well.
I have, yes, Rob. Yeah, browsed up and down the list and picked one. It is actually quite similar to the one that John picked in terms of how to be exploited, but it's actually the vulnerability obviously differs in that this is to do with Windows Media Player. So this is CVE 2020-1508, which basically concerns a vulnerability in Windows Media Player. It currently has a CVSS score of 7.6, but it has a vendor severity of critical. I suspect that the CVSS score might actually go up shortly to match the criticality that the vendor has given it. Basically, Microsoft's description of this vulnerability is as follows. They state that it's a remote code execution vulnerability that exists when media player audio decoder improperly handles objects. An attacker who successfully exploited the vulnerability could take control of an affected system. They've also stated that the attack may be initiated remotely. So this is sort of similar to what John was saying, and that the successful exploitation only requires simple authentication. There are multiple ways in which the attacker could exploit the vulnerability, again similar to John, such as convincing a user to open a specially crafted document, or convincing the user to visit a malicious web page. So yeah, obviously every device has media player, so potentially every device is vulnerable.
Yeah, I don't suppose you remember, Pete, but media player was actually a weaponized vulnerability just a couple of months ago, I seem to remember.
Right, well, there you go.
It was either weaponized or public aware, but either way,
Yeah.
you need to learn your lesson sometimes. And
yeah, and you certainly won't want to disable a media player. I think that would annoy quite a lot of people. So yeah, you need to make it safe.
Yeah. That's brilliant, guys. Thank you so much. So just to recap, this is our top pick. So we have all of our 6 factors across the top, and everything that is Syxsense recommended just has a yes against it. So if any of these are related to your environment, to add the CVE into your tool set, and it should give you the percentage of your devices that are vulnerable for that CVE. And then simply deploy those how you can in whichever patching strategy you have. If you'd like some help with the strategy, you can just download that PDF just there. Okay, so thank you, gents. That's brilliant. We're going to look at some issues. This was something we added a couple of webinars ago. But this is the same issue that happened. This was the same issue that was published in the last Patch Tuesday for August. So if you're using Windows Server 2008 R2, certain operations may fail on cluster shared volumes. It looks like they haven't fixed the issue. Potentially this isn't high enough in importance to fix, maybe because it's you require the ESU, and maybe there isn't such a large customer base for 2008. I don't think that's the case, but this issue has now happened for 2 months in a row. So if you do have cluster servers in your environment, extra testing needs to be conducted. Make sure you have a server backup before you do the upgrade, and obviously do some testing after you've done the upgrade. And for Windows 10, if you're using feature update 1809, which ironically has a end of life, I think, earlier than 1803. If you see an error on the page when using the legacy version of Microsoft Edge, sorry, you get an error on page when using the legacy version of Microsoft Edge, specifically when you're using non-standard ports. The recommendation by the vendor is to upgrade to the new Chromium-based Edge. So that is upgrade from the non-Chromium version, which I think was feature-based. It was a Windows feature-based, to the new Edge, which is more application-based. There is a workaround from Microsoft, which is to uninstall and reinstall any recently installed or updated language packs. So if you have done any of those two, a workaround is to uninstall and reinstall. If that doesn't work, I'm afraid you have to restore the operating system and start again.
Testing.
Testing, absolutely testing. I think we might even do a future webinar on testing, because we do have a pretty sophisticated test that we have for all of our content that we release. Even the Microsoft has done testing, we still test it as well. So we do have a pretty sophisticated test strategy of our own, which you may bring to a future webinar. However, I think, John, you've got some Windows 10 feature update information for us with regards to the life cycle.
Yeah, absolutely. As you mentioned earlier, one of the particular versions for Windows Enterprise has been extended out into May. I think it was actually scheduled to be deprecated somewhere around October and November of this year. So they've given it an extra 6 months, and again, that's for enterprise only Windows 10 1803. There are actually some other versions, as we mentioned in previous webinars, that have been extended also due to COVID-19. Just a few months, pretty much just extended them out to the end of this year. They would have already been obsolete as of April and I believe May, respectively, for those. And those are the other versions that we can see on this chart that have asterisks. So number of versions have been extended just really till the end of this year. What I have noticed across various environments is that many are still actually rocking 1809, 1903, If you are running anything lesser than 1909, I would recommend just go to 1909, really, because as you see from this breakdown, especially with enterprise, you actually have the longest life cycle for that. It is possible, based on trend, that they could extend a few of these other versions out even farther than what they've already documented from their initial release. But the latest, of course, at the moment is still 2004, slated to expire end of next year. It is still, again, the newest. So if you're not comfortable going to the newest version, because there, of course, have been some reported driver conflicts and some imaging issues, not widespread, typically more for consumer versions like Home and Pro, but it's always a possibility. 1909, of course, has been around 6 months. It's been around for 6 months before that. So going to 1909 will give you the longer support date, and of course, it's well established still within the industry.
Yeah,
also
it was the, sorry, John, it was actually the 1809. I noticed if you go to 1809, you actually have a longer life cycle than 1903. But like you said, I think Microsoft are going to be pushing the end of life, especially for some of these enterprise and education editions, into the future as we get closer and closer.
It's interesting, for a couple of these versions, they standardized the end date, and we've noticed that that's been the spring releases. So as we see from 1903, 2004, they're both going to expire on the same date. So that might change in the future. Maybe it might just be that their fall releases will have a 18-month and 30-month life cycle like they had initially intended. But they're still making changes. So be sure to always check your dates with whichever version you're using. It can easily change.
That's brilliant. And just for everyone's, you may have noticed we've actually put the website right at the top here. So this actually is directly from the Microsoft site. So if you go to support.microsoft.com and download the Windows Lifecycle fact sheet, it has all of the dates that is actually live here.
Long-term service channel, service branch. If you roll this out within the environment, not much that you really have to worry about. Mainstream support is going to be ending for the original version of long-term service branch, released back at pretty much the beginning of Windows 10 back in 2015. So you still have extended support, but again, mainstream support will be ending in October of this year.
Yep. Thank you, John. Did you want to go into Mac OS as well? I know you're a bit of our Mac whiz as well, so.
I can cover a bit off. Yeah, I do have some information. As you mentioned at the beginning, Mac OS, about to say X, no, it's going to be 11, has been put into beta. So actually yesterday, Apple did release a new beta of the upcoming Mac OS 11 called Big Sur, an update to its public beta testing group, allowing non-developers to try out the new OS ahead of its public release, which we estimate it's going to be sometime later this fall, maybe potentially the end of this month, or maybe in October. Any beta testers who signed up for the beta testing program can go ahead and download the Big Sur beta through the software update mechanism in system preferences after installing, of course, the proper profile. The new OS introduces a refinished design more similar to the mobile OS, mobile iOS, I should say. So similar to what Windows 10, or pretty much Windows 10, Windows 8 had done with shifting kind of the idea with Windows compared to older versions like Windows 7, making it more tablet-based, mobile-based. It's the same idea. It does also bring the control center to the Mac for the first time, providing easier access to base system functions like volume, brightness, and network status. So sounds like it's going to be a much easier OS for any Mac users. As well as there is a supplemental update for Catalina. Really just to highlight here, stability issues have been resolved. There is an issue resolved with, I think it was like a graphic issue on a particular model of iMac after it's been woken from sleep. But interesting about this update, it's very large. So you got on this 2.82 gigabytes. So to make sure you have enough disk space if you're still running Catalina and you want to get that supplemental update.
It's almost as big as a feature update, isn't it?
Absolutely.
I wonder if it is one in disguise.
Just a quick breakdown for Linux, for feedback, just keep this brief with going through the updates. It is all on one page here, and these are the particular updates that are resolving vulnerabilities rated by CVSS score. So some distributions to pay attention to: Oracle, Red Hat, SUSE, Amazon. if you have any of these particular versions, do make sure that you are, of course, updating them properly. Like any changes you'll be introducing into an environment, make sure you test everything first. It's always a strong recommendation. No matter what change you're actually really making, it's best to phase that in. But again, rated by severity, Oracle has the highest kernel update, same with Red Hat, same as SUSE, with CVSS scores as high as 9.8. So do make sure that these are prioritized, but still some lower updates as well related to some other areas of the machines. Again, make sure that you're getting those updates out.
That's brilliant. And if you are using if you are using the Syxsense tool, just search for these codes here, and you'll find all of these in the system. It was just interesting that the CVSS is so high for some of these, and some of the vendors actually are using moderate and in importance of area, not even in critical. So it just goes to show you combining the two, I think, is very, very important.
I remember talking about that, Rob, in the past, where saying you don't always want to trust the vendor. It's not always in their interest to play up the level of severity, is it, of a vulnerability.
Yeah, and I think if you're a Linux administrator, and obviously we compare this against Microsoft a lot, you still want to keep your servers and your end users safe. So even though the vendor is saying it's important or just moderate, which is I think is like medium, take the CVSS's word for it, and make sure you deploy these. And since these are kernels, I only know these because I speak to my team about the kernel updates. These are very important updates and also very big updates. So please make sure you have testing of kernel before you actually deploy this out wide to your user base. Okay, I think we've got 3 minutes left of the webinar, and just go back to Heidi. I was wondering if we have any questions. Maybe we could take maybe one or two before we finish.
Hi, Rob. We have several questions. First one is, can I skip a Windows 10 feature update version, or do I have to install them in sequence?
I'll take that one, but I think JC might have alluded to this when he was just doing his final talk there. Yes, you can certainly skip an update version. That's not a problem at all. JC, obviously add to this, and Rob, if you feel anything. You certainly can't go back. So once you've deployed, that's it. It's a one-way street, but you don't have to do them in sequence. So if you're on an earlier version, I think John mentioned going to, was it 1909 rather than maybe 2004, just so you're not on the sharp edge of deployment there. But yeah,
brilliant.
It's certainly possible.
Okay, and then the second one is in the chart showing the life cycle of feature updates. They noticed a version of Windows 10 named IoT. And what is IoT?
Again, I think that was my chart, actually. Someone's eagle-eyed there to spot that. So yeah, basically IoT is Internet of Things. So that's a particular version of Windows 10. It's really designed to be used for things like sensors, point of sale, or even ATM machines. So it's a fairly specialized OS. You wouldn't find that type of OS just normally on a laptop or anything like that. It'd be very much cut down, but obviously it's still vulnerable or potentially vulnerable, and therefore you want to make sure that you have feature updates, the correct feature updates installed on that. There we go.
Wonderful. Thank you, Pete.
No probs.
Okay, and then the last question was Windows 10 version 2009 released this month?
I can answer that one. It was not released this month. I was hoping it was going to be, but it'll most likely get pushed out to next month. 2009 is really going to be a small update for most users. The biggest thing, at least when we heard from previewers, is that it's really just introducing the Chromium-based Edge as the standardized browser in the future. So it should be treated similar to a service pack, although of course it is still technically a feature update, still go through the normal testing procedure, but it should be a much smaller update given that it is not introducing a number of changes. This could also be due to the COVID-19 situation, trying to minimize the amount of changes that are taking place. We should be seeing that next month.
I did know that, John. That's really great to know. Thank you.
Rob, that's it for the questions.
Wonderful. So thank you very much for attending today. I think we've just got 30 seconds left. I would like to say thank you again for joining us today. If you do have any questions or if you'd like to talk to us through all the channels I've mentioned so far, we hope you have a great week and be safe until October. Thank you very much.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.